Nic, it's like we're wearing the same clothes as last week.
I haven't changed.
We're actually recording on the same day. Nic is about to take a wonderful vacation, so we need to get a couple of these done before he leaves. So that's why we're wearing the same clothes. And so we thought today we would talk about procrastination. As many of you may know, Nic has a TEDx talk that currently has 3.1 million views, well on its way to 3.2, and very popular, obviously, with a lot of comments. I mean, some really great engagement on in the comment section, which is fantastic. From that, we actually, because of that, we started Vogue Academy and now have the procrastination course, which is available, and there is over 3 hours of content, everything you need to learn about procrastination, and also great tools to help you overcome procrastination. So in setting up this talk, I said to Nic, why don't we say that procrastination course doesn't exist? Someone has watched the TEDx talk on procrastination, which perhaps, Nic, you could provide a quick
Sure.
summary, and then what's next, or what would you say to that person? You could, obviously go buy the course, and that would be great. You get a very comprehensive understanding of why we procrastinate and some really great strategies to overcome procrastination. But let's say they haven't done that yet. What would you say to them now?
It's a great question. So it's kind of what's next from the talk, and in fact, that is a thread in some of the comments. So I look at the comments and try to respond as many as I can. And so let me just start by saying that the talk, it's called Self-Worth Theory, the Key to Understanding and Overcoming Procrastination. And really the emphasis in this case is self-worth theory is the first thing. And that is a tool, or more accurately, excuse me, I should say, a lens for analyzing, thinking about what procrastination is and why people do it. And then that lens or analysis is the basis for solutions, strategies, ways to interrupt it. But the talk actually is meant to illustrate self-worth theory of achievement motivation. And it uses procrastination as an example for the purposes of analysis. So it's not really designed to provide an extended solution to procrastination. And people appreciate what I have, but they sometimes point that out. I would say I would absolutely agree. You can't do much in 20 minutes. At the same time, as a speaker, if I talk about a problem like procrastination, people reasonably expect some kind of solution. I think that's a fair assumption. And so I try to do that. And there are some concrete tools and techniques for addressing procrastination. But what the theory does is it provides an explanation of why we procrastinate at a core level, which is missing from most explanations of procrastination. So that's one reason I picked procrastination as the human phenomenon to illustrate what self-worth theory of achievement is. People are talking about procrastination in ways that I think are limited, particularly for people who have really struggled with procrastination. They've really tried. They said, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to change, and then they don't, and they do that again and again. So they really have got into a routine, and they've found it pretty intractable. And so that means more superficial, surface level strategies aren't working. And I think self-worth theory, because it's trying to get at the core, is more effective for those people. So what is this analysis, right, of self-worth theory? Well, self-worth theory itself is a broad paradigm in psychology. It's used in lots of different places. You might not even recognize it. If anybody is familiar with the book Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele actually articulates that approach comes from, broadly speaking, a self-worth theory paradigm. The approach that I'm using specifically says self-worth theory applied to achievement and achievement contexts. So that would be sports, work, and definitely school. And does this framework, a way of seeing this phenomena, illuminate something? And I think it does. And many people say, oh my gosh, what you just told me explains my behavior to myself in ways that I didn't anticipate, and I'm surprised. So what exactly is self-worth theory? So self-worth theory starts with a premise that the fundamental human need is to be seen as competent and able, and that's what helps us define ourselves as good. We need to be good people to ourselves. It's very difficult to tolerate a sense that I'm not a good person. And so where does that goodness come from? Well, in many academic contexts, I'm a good student because I perform well. I get good grades. So good grades are an indication that I'm a good student, and that's an indication that I'm capable, that I'm smart. So my worthiness as a student and easily as a person arises from my capacity, my capabilities, being smart. Then it's not exactly the same. You can kind of draw a triangle that my grades reinforce my sense that I'm worthy, but so does my perception of myself, and the perception of others that I'm smart also feeds into my sense of worth. But there are times when these things can be at odds or in conflict. So if I carry around this idea that my performance or my grades, my achievement is equivalent to my ability, which is equivalent to my worth, but my sense of my ability is most important, there are times where these things could be at odds, and I might trade off, for instance, my grades to protect my sense of myself as able, particularly relative, so that other people can see that. So for instance, procrastination actually functions that way. So, or it can function that way. So if I put off working on something, or in various ways create conditions that sort of handicap my performance, that if I don't perform well, my grade is not to this outstanding or excellent standard, I can still maintain the claim or belief that I'm brilliant, I'm smart. Why? Because I have an explanation that of my less than exemplary performance in terms of not my ability, but my procrastination, my effort. I'm kind of a slacker, but I'm smart. And that's an indication of the value structure in our society, right? Most people certainly schools value the smart students. And so there are these dynamics going on that can easily lead to procrastination that people aren't aware, that they don't realize that they're avoiding engaging fully in a task that they need to achieve because it's a self-protective strategy. And in particular, it protects their sense of their self as capable, even as it puts at risk or even sacrifices grades. And that is very counterintuitive. Well, if I equate my grades with my worth, wouldn't I put everything into getting good grades? But that's missing a key step in this, or element of this equation, that can create mixed motivations or even conflicting motivations. So that's the foundation. That's what self-worth theory provides, this angle.
Right.
That's kind of a summary of the talk.
And I would say, and I think there's an important point there. You say that self-worth theory in achievement context, or
yes,
right? Because it's like we've had this discussion before where I'm like, bring my Kierkegaard self. I'm like, well, gaining self-worth through achievement is just one possibility. You don't have to have that.
right.
But you're saying in an achievement context, like school, sports, whatever, these tend to be the dynamics that most of us embrace, often unconsciously. Right. I mean,
because the institutions propound those. You get you get more grade points worth because you got a higher grade because you performed according to somebody else's evaluation of you.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty built in. But yeah, it's not only. There are, and the university, the institutions try to send other messages, that you're a good student because you do the right behaviors, or you're a good student because you're curious. They just tend not to be rewarded.
Right. So, or
directly.
I guess, they're rewarded by not being punished.
Yes, conceivably.
Right. So, okay. So then I think just to clarify, so these dynamics are going on, that there's your self-worth is at risk in this context. And so deep down, probably, we're not consciously aware of, we're not saying, oh, let me put my grades at risk in order to protect myself. It's happening inside us. We're just unaware of it.
Yeah.
So that's where people say, oh, that seems weird that someone would do that. Well, it's like, yeah, we'll just take, find your achievement context, be it work or whatever, and you're probably going to see that that's going on. So that's the need for, I'm going to move ahead here, like being self-aware of these dynamics is like
right.
is so important, right? Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that's right. So one of the things is we're not fully conscious or aware of these dynamics, though once they're pointed out, people often recognize them in retrospect. In the moment, it's particularly hard. There's two big ideas coming together. Is that self-awareness is crucial because these are subjective experiences. I can't know them. If about you, I might see some signs and I can but you may not be able to interpret them either, particularly if you don't have a framework like self-worth theory. So I take very seriously that there's a way that I'm providing you with some ideas that then tell you about you in new and deep ways. And that's kind of weird. But I would just say, first of all, this is not just, it's called self-worth theory, but there's lots and lots of research, empirical research to support it. And then secondly, it's not the only explanation of your actions, but if this is a framework that then you can use mindfully to understand yourself according to your standards, then it's useful, right? And so that's where the self-awareness, but then self-knowledge, you need to apply that and then look at it. And so that's a crucial step. And if you don't do that, then many people, for instance, implement strategies and techniques to overcome procrastination that actually don't work because their analysis is wrong. So for instance, many people try to scare themselves out of procrastination. If I don't do this, this bad thing's going to happen. But often they're procrastinating because they're fearful of the impact on their identity. So scaring yourself more may not work. It often does not. But that insight follows from this framework, right? This lens on motivation for achievement that you could only have if you had this perspective. It kind of makes sense on the surface to say, yeah, you're not doing anything, you're not taking action. We need energy. Fear is energy, so do it. What I would say is that is energy that often leads away from the task. Number one, it's called aversion or avoidance, but two, also makes it hard to do the task. So if you're in a state of fear, it's hard to write a good paper. If you're in a state of fear, it's hard to do a cogent and thoughtful analysis of the latest sales data and write a memo about it. Those are hard, those are challenging cognitive tasks. States of fear are not conducive to that. So now, is doing it under a state of fear better than not doing it at all? Probably. But you're not going to do your best work and it's not going to feel very good. And so self-worth theory would suggest let's try to find some other motivations that are not based on avoidance, fear, threat, things like that.
So as you were talking, I was wondering, it's easy for us, common, I would say, for a lot of people to look at people who procrastinate, especially ourselves, and say, oh, I'm lazy, what's wrong with me, all these kind of things. And so self-worth theory is a way to kind of hopefully dispel that and get you so you see that as not laziness. In fact, as you say in the course and maybe in the video, I can't remember, the people who procrastinate are often overly motivated.
That's right.
So that's one big takeaway I hope people get is like, the intent of your talk and the course is to show you that, that you shouldn't be judging yourself in that way. But I'm curious, when people become self-aware and say, oh my gosh, this is who I am, this is the dynamics going on, and I see the protective nature, do they become judgmental in that moment, or is it more a relief? Or what is your experience when you work with students and they come to this realization about themselves?
Well, I think they certainly can judge themselves because avoidance evokes guilt. And so they will easily feel guilty. And guilt doesn't feel very good. And
Right.
That is a kind of judgment. One thing I'd point out is procrastination is often a way to avoid shame, which is even more toxic and corrosive than guilt. So if I say I'm lazy, that doesn't feel very good. And I might feel guilty that I didn't do certain things. If I conclude I'm not capable, because I wasn't engaged in that situation, that scenario of the task, and I feel guilty about that. I should have done that and I didn't. If I say I'm incapable of doing that because I'm not smart enough, capable enough, that often goes even deeper, and that's shame. And so sometimes I'll say that procrastination is a mental tool for turning possible shame into probable guilt. So right, I could feel ashamed, and that's so scary, so awful of a feeling to feel ashamed. But I'm actually willing to experience guilt to not feel shame.
So that's a way to kind of like, okay, so if I sabotage my grades or at least put my grades at risk, then, well, then if I don't get that good grade, it doesn't say I'm incapable. It just I say to myself, well, if I had spent some more time or
right.
whatever, blah blah blah, then yeah, then it I'm still able or still to think I can kind of fool myself and I'm able. Okay, that was just,
but I can feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I mean, this is not hypothetical. This is me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So, and you'll notice this. So one little test, and I will come back to what's the next step after the talk. But here's a little test that I found that's useful to help people understand what's motivating them. Because it's fundamentally, we have a couple. You said we have approach and avoidance motives, and they can be kind of pointing in the same direction or at odds. So one way to think about procrastination is a feeling of stuckness, because we have a desire to achieve, to test ourselves, to grow, and a desire to protect ourselves and defend our reputation, our sense of who we are. And those can be at odds, right? Because to achieve something, I have to do some kind of risk. But what am I risking? I'm risking my sense of myself as able. So then I don't want to, I have a aversion to that. So then I could feel stuck. And a lot of times people who procrastinate feel both of those impulses very powerfully. And in that sense, they're over motivated, right? They have a lot of motivation. But one thing I'll point out to people is, because they'll say, I'm not motivated to do this, or they don't recognize how their aversion, their fear is operating in. They don't notice it. And I'll say, okay, particularly if you're sitting in a classroom at Princeton and I'm talking to you, you've achieved things. You're there because you procrastinated, but you've also there because you achieved things. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So I'd say, okay, so you've achieved things. After you achieved that thing, you were worried, you put it off, and you're worried, and then you got that A. What did you feel? Did you feel triumphant? Yes, I achieved that thing. Or do you feel relief? Whew, I didn't get caught that time. I got by, right? If it's the latter, that suggests you're being motivated by avoidance, because relief is the non-occurrence of something negative, avoidance. And so people realize, oh my gosh, I am really motivated by avoidance. They say to themselves, I'm motivated to get good grades. But if you scratch the surface, they're often motivated to not get bad grades by getting good grades. Not the same motivation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I thought that was great. Yeah, that's awesome. So do you want to move on then to kind of next steps?
So
again, let me just say, I thought that was really good clarification. Just, obviously, I hope people will go watch your TEDx talk. I hope they'll go to the course where all this is explained in detail. But I just thought that was a good summary. So thank you. So next steps. Yeah.
Right. So I think what's not obvious from the talk, if you've seen it or you go to look at it, is there's a bunch more strategies. So the point isn't this is the sum and total explanation of procrastination. The point of this is to say this is an explanation of the core why, at the most really almost existential. Who am I is motivating my procrastination. But there's a lot of other things that are contributing to how and why we procrastinate. And those other dimensions of procrastination, we might say, are subject to tools, strategies, techniques that we can interrupt these patterns. And so that's not obvious from the talk, but that absolutely is what the course is about. So for instance, we can work on our beliefs about ability. That would be, so for instance, mindset, growth mindset, that is trying to intervene at the level of beliefs. But we can also intervene at the level, even if we can't change those beliefs, if we are fearful that our grades, we do believe that our grades reflect our self-worth. And again, that's not a given. People get their self-worth from lots of other sources. But you don't have to change that to stop procrastinating. You can modulate your motivations. You can lift up intrinsic motivations. You can consciously turn down other kinds of motivations, put your attention not on what the consequences for this GPA and whether you're going to be the valedictorian or not is, but bring that attention to the present moment and your motivation to the present moment and say, what's interesting to me? Let me explore this. What could I find out? What's of value to me in this activity? And that's a very different orientation, both in terms of attention and then motivation. We can also intervene in terms of our emotional states. So procrastination is often expression of essentially freeze or conflict. So those are states of basically of fear. So fight, flight, right? Or freeze response. And that's an emotional response to my assessment of the meaning of the assignment and my likelihood that I can get a good grade and the consequences of that. And so but you don't have to address all those things. You don't have to, in some other way, make sure you get into Harvard Medical School. You can just address your emotional state, right? You can work at that level, because the negative effects of being fearful for your performance on the task or to get started on the task can be addressed as emotions. Not only, we don't have to go to the roots of why you have that emotion. So I can turn down my feeling of anxiety. I can, through breathing, I can gain awareness of that in various ways. I can identify, I can work with other people that reduce my anxiety. I can plan things out that make it concrete and the tasks clear to me and therefore less uncertain. And this is a common strategy, right? That people who are told to do with procrastination, what they're not told is why it works. It's not just a task management, it's an emotional management. It's an emotional self-regulation technique. So emotions and negative aversive emotions, agitation, anxiety, fear, distress, these things are evoked by the achievement situation, my interpretation of it, and then those emotions block me from doing the task. So it serves then as a obstacle to even engage in the activity of writing the paper or doing the problem set or engaging in the research. So one thing I'd point out is that obstacle is subject to different kinds of strategies, namely emotional regulation, than is writing the paper. That's a whole nother set of strategies. How do I outline? How do I generate ideas? How do I get feedback? So, and that's not obvious from the TED Talk, but that's a way to intervene in how we procrastinate, because we get stuck because of our emotional state. We can keep going. We can say a lot of times people procrastinate because of the way they're talking to themselves. So the cognitive dimension, the way they frame the task, how they talk to themselves about the task or doing the task, it lifts emotions. It can lead to delay. Oh, I can do it on the weekend. People aren't even aware that they're talking to themselves in particular ways that are not conducive to engagement or starting or persisting. They can talk to themselves, like I said, to magnify the stakes, to thinking that's going to help them. They can denigrate themselves. I should be able to do this. I should be able to do this. Why can't I do this? They're not even aware that this is a tape. But if you think of the effect of those statements, if literally someone was standing next to you saying that into your ear, or you to somebody else, what would the effect of that be on your ability to do the task?
Right.
So on the one hand, that can be scary. Wow, there's other layers. Wow, there's a lot of dimensions of human action that get in the way of productive engagement and lead to avoidance. I think that's understand. That's true. But it also suggests there's a lot of ways to interrupt those patterns. So the more we can disentangle intention, attention, emotion, cognition, motivation, beliefs, that to me suggests more ways in. And that's what it's not obvious from the TED Talk that that's what we do, but we do that in the course. So we kind of think about human action through a prism, right? Action is determined by our attention. Action is determined in the sense of partially determined, or influenced by our intention, by our cognition, our self-talk, our framing, false perceptions we have, or strategies that we have or don't have. It's affected by our emotional state, our moods, feelings, sensations. It's affected by the kinds of motivation and properties and our belief systems. And so what the course does, again, it's not evident from the workshops, it builds on these foundational beliefs about ability and worth and says, sort of, in my view, what's at the next level up, basically. Thoughts, emotions, intentions, behavior. And then we also look at environment. And so a lot of interventions in procrastination are changes to people's environment. And again, that's really good. I didn't talk about that in the TED Talk, but that's another way to shift your energy to engage and start, is by changing and designing your environment in intentional ways that limit avoidance motivations and lift up approach motivations. And that, just to say one last thing, there's a social dimension. So one to this as well, one way to change your environment that promotes engagement productively and not procrastination is to create a study group and writing group that you're working with someone that helps you to do that. And you might not think that's an intervention for procrastination that follows from self-worth, and maybe it doesn't exactly, but I think we can see that it's going to be quite useful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And again, just to say, we in the course, we kind of, as you said, disentangle these dimensions into 6 areas, like context, behavior, thoughts, emotions, motivations, core beliefs, and I'm probably missing one. And then we talk about strategies at each of those dimensions. And what we did in the course is we actually created a matrix, a drag and drop matrix, to help you kind of figure out which dimension is probably a top priority for you, which strategy within each dimension is most likely to be useful or efficacious for you. And because we're like, okay, we can present this information, but it's really on you, on the user of the course, to evaluate themselves and figure out themselves and how to move forward. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, let me make one more last point about that. So one of the reasons that I've tried to disentangle, and I think of it as like as a prism, we can look at the action and not just the behavior, what I can observe, but the intention and emotions and thoughts and motivations and values and beliefs that are all influencing that action. One of the reasons we kind of pull that apart, it is somewhat artificial, is because different traditions in psychology have developed tools specifically for each of those dimensions. So there are cognitive behavioral training tools to help people change their own behavior. There are tools that are, and these are research-based. They've been studied, they've been developed, they've been refined, and they've been shown to be effective. Same thing with the emotional dimension. Okay, beliefs. Well, growth mindset. That, if you've heard of the mindset and growth versus fixed mindset and interventions, that's a bunch of research that said, hey, if we can impact people's beliefs, will it change their actions or their behavior? So these techniques and tools have been developed for each of the dimensions. So if we pull it apart, then we can target these tried and true tools to that different dimension. And with self-knowledge, you can realize, oh, I'm not emotionally aggravated, but I'm not talking to myself in very helpful ways. Or my attention is not on the task at hand. So how do I do that? So that's really one of the benefits of somewhat artificially pulling apart these different dimensions, because the tools line up. And that's just partly the way that psychological research is done. People tend to be cognitivists or come from an affective point of view or looking at foundational beliefs. And so then they pursue that work and take it as far as they can go, including creating tools. And then we're borrowing from these different traditions within, in most cases, psychology, and then pulling them together in a way that any individual expert in one of those domains may not.
Right. Yeah. So thank you. That's great. And again, I think it goes back to our attempt to try to create a holistic, comprehensive
Right.
anthropology. So yeah, like you said, it's artificial, but it's very easy to get to focus on the cognitive or the emotional and not see that humans are this whole being.
Yep.
That, and you do talk about this in the course, like what you're saying to yourself at the cognitive level is impacting the emotion and vice versa, or can. So
and it follows from a belief.
Yeah, it follows from belief. So when appropriate, you're sharing, we actually you do come back to other strategies like that you might have talked about at the cognitive, but then at the emotional level, you come back to those just to talk about them, because it is artificial. I mean, that you are a whole being, and what's happening in one dimension is impacting others. So I'm curious before we go. So obviously 3.1 million views. This touched a nerve. I think people found it incredibly insightful, and incredibly helpful too. And I think in a way, it's what I've appreciated about it. But one reason I've appreciated is just to give hope in a way.
Yeah.
Just to, because I think it's easy for people who do struggle with procrastination to really beat themselves up. And so to give them another way of looking at it and reframing it in a way that you go, oh, I didn't even realize that about myself. And then there's a way to move forward and perhaps overcome procrastination. So really appreciate that. I'm curious, have people challenged your view, or people question aspects of what you said? I'd be curious what if that's happened, and
sure.
Yeah,
I think so. One, I don't know if it's common, but one angle that's, because it's a very different starting point theoretically, is behavioral economics, right? So Danny Kahneman, and the many decades of research thereafter. So this is often basically people are explaining procrastination in terms of economic terms, that assume people are primarily rational decision makers about their time and resources and rewards, and that you can explain procrastination in some ways in terms of that cost benefit analysis. Other people are saying this is all, if you adopt a neurological or neuroscience perspective, they would kind of just dismiss this. Well, what's going on in your brain? That's what matters, and chemicals. I would disagree that what's happening in our brain doesn't cause human behavior, number one. Number two, our brains are doing things because our minds are doing things, our emotions and our bodies. That's not a one-way street. So that doesn't exactly solve the problem, though it can provide some insight. So those are a couple of positions. I think I'm not claiming so much that I have a comprehensive explanation. I think that's very difficult. I think procrastination actually is many different things. What I'm trying to do is provide an explanation that lends itself to practical interventions in the context that I'm interested in particular, which is achievement contexts. So I think those are legitimate challenges. There's others that are more mainstream psychological theories of motivation. Expectancy value theory offers a different explanation. I think though people might say them as different. What I would say is they're picking a dimension or two and focusing on that and providing often useful analyses, but they're often omitting this core, which is self-relationality, the self-worth. And so those analyses can be useful, but I would say incomplete. And then there's a tendency sometimes to want to, maybe with the aim of helping people have hope, there's a kind of, hey, it's simple, it's not that hard, just do it. Hey, I've got the answer. It's just one thing. Procrastination is just mood regulation. And then so that's appealing to people who are really struggling, like, oh, it's just this one thing, and I do that thing, and I'm going to get over this thing, and I'm really suffering, and that's very appealing to me. So that is a critique. Like, you're doing is too complicated. It's not that hard, Nick. It's not rocket science. It's people are lazy, or they're anxious, and that's it. And I would say, if that works for you, fantastic. But again, if we go back to the the original point, we're identifying those people who've tried those things and it didn't work. And they tried with earnestness, and they're perplexed by the fact that they can't change their actions, and that they feel they need a different kind of explanation. And so let me end with this thought. I would say that procrastination by the numbers it's quite normal. It is normative. That is the norm behavior. Most people do it. That's the definition of a norm. It's understandable, but it's not inevitable. And that many people who are really stuck in the throes of procrastination, again, is who I'm thinking of, they think something is wrong with me. And what I want them to say is, no, something is wrong with the way you're thinking about procrastination. And in fact, so too with those people who are sending you these messages that it's easy and it's simple and it's one step and you just do this thing, that actually reinforces the attribution that there's something wrong with me, because if I believe social media, all these people got over procrastination by doing this one little thing, but it didn't work for me. So it must be me. Right. And I think this is clearly false.
Right. No, no, that's what I really appreciate. And we talk about that in the course, how the danger of those types of courses, because I mean, I don't know what you said, you articulated much better than I could, but just to reinforce it, that yeah, it could work, and if it does work, fantastic. But beware that if it doesn't work, it should not be yet another judgment that you weigh yourself down with. Okay, so before we go, why not be a little controversial?
Okay.
You and I have looked at some articles. I can't say it's a trend, but there's definitely people out there who are saying procrastination is a product of trauma. So I don't know if you've looked at it extensively. I mean, I've just kind of glanced at a few articles about it. Any thoughts there? Initial thoughts? Or
I mean, a couple. Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've delved into that a lot. I would say a couple things come to mind. First of all, I don't know how you know. I'm not sure how you trace a particular action to a particular trauma across years. So, you know, if someone makes that insight, I would say that if you can identify the source, then there may be some therapeutic or other kinds of interventions, right? I'm not a therapist. We're not trying to make a therapeutic intervention. So if you have identified the source of your procrastination as resulting from a psychological trauma that is a clinical level, I'm not the person for you, probably. At the very least, I could only add to your toolkit. But this is not a therapeutic intervention. So the extent that trauma then puts it in another category of clinical, then it's outside my scope. It's not what we're trying to do. But I will pick up one part of the controversy there. It seems to me that in popular parlance or discourse, trauma is used in a way that that term is used in a way that I think people who study trauma would often disagree with. So trauma is, in my understanding, is not the precipitating event that happened years or whatever ago. Trauma is the response to that on an ongoing, daily, yearly, even on a decade basis. It's how we relive that. It's how we re-experience those events. And on the one hand, so I think that matters because I think it opens up some possibilities to intervene and maybe using some of the tools that I've suggested. So if someone really wanted to explore this, I might say, what does the research on cognitive behavioral training say about intervening with people who experience trauma? Because those are the same tools we're using. What does ACT, which is emotional regulation framework, what is the effect? What is the utility been of people using that framework who've in clinical research settings, and have they found that useful in addressing the consequences of trauma? So it's a little bit of a punt in the sense that I don't know a lot, but the core tools we're drawing upon, people probably have studied that. I don't think that trauma is an absolute totalist explanation of anything. It doesn't mean you can't make change. I don't think. That's not my understanding of reading what little I have of that literature. And that the way we intervene, there's lots of ways to intervene, again, I would say. And to the extent that these tools work for other quote causes or reasons for procrastinate, they could work for trauma. It's worth a try. Other people could probably say more about it. They're gonna if someone brings a trauma and perspective to procrastination, they're gonna highlight different things. We've brought a self-worth framework, and we're gonna highlight different things. So those may be incommensurate. They may not line up totally, but they could line up quite a lot, actually. So, but I don't know.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, of what I've seen, it is universalized. Like, you are procrastinating because of trauma. And I'm like, well, as you said, it could be, but that can be yet another silver bullet, solution. Not even silver bullet. It's just like, okay, there's this one dimension. We're going to focus on this one thing, and that's why you're procrastinating. And I think that's dangerous. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, right. So I see this around like procrastination with writing. It not only is it dangerous explanation, but it can actually create a bar that's hard to overcome. So if you're procrastinating because you're traumatized, then does that mean I have to deal with my trauma to get over procrastination? And boy, that's a lifetime of trauma. Wow, that's a big bar to get my paper turned in or write my report. And so that's putting a demand on me that I think I would say is probably unnecessary, and at the very least is daunting. So what's the equivalent less dramatically in writing? You'll often hear people say, you can't be a writer until you believe you're a writer. And I'm like, I think I understand the logic there, but you've just given people struggling to write one more obstacle they have to overcome to write. I just want to write the paper. Now you're telling me I have to believe I'm a writer too? And I have to do that first before I can even write? I don't think this is useful. I think what you want to say is, if you can deal with your trauma, and I don't want to make that sound simple, then that will help you with procrastination. Almost certainly, I would think yes, because there's an emotional dimension of nothing else. And correspondingly, if you can internalize a deep belief that you're a writer, will that help you write better? I would think so, for sure. Is it necessary? Is it required? Do you have to do it? I would say no. Clearly, there are people who are professional writers struggle to write, and then they write and they turn things in and get them published, but they would still say I procrastinate. So no, and they feel like an imposter and they feel inadequate. So no, you don't have to believe that. And why are we throwing an extra belief on people? Don't do that. We've misconstrued it. Instead of saying it's useful, we're saying it's necessary. That is dangerous.
Right. Well, great. Well, we're about at our end of time here. Any last thoughts? I mean, so look, you have your talk, your TEDx talk, you have your course. There's this, you've written on it.
Yeah.
What would you, given this discussion we've had, any last thoughts?
I think the thing I would say is, a lot of this rests, to come back, on self-awareness and self-knowledge. And some people might think, no, I just want to get past that and just tell me the tip or the tool or the strategy. And, I remember reading an early piece, a very profound piece for me personally and professionally, on overcoming procrastination. And it specifically said, yeah, we don't usually think of it in these terms, but self-awareness is a strategy. And in that work was the most important strategy in overcoming procrastination. And that really sparked a light in my mind and really affected a shift in thinking about it. So I would leave people with that. That is from Burka and Yuen. That is not my idea. So let me cite them. That self-awareness is a strategy.
Well, that's great. Well, you should have the last word, but I'm going to say the last thing here. But I just really appreciate the work you've done here, because, again, self-worth theory of achievement motivation in achievement contexts. I just, I take away all the other stuff. There's this idea of self-worth, and I feel like the human beings, in terms of, we talk about self-relationality, which I think is another talk we should do, what we mean by that. But the idea that we are constantly seeking meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, seeking self-worth, and that's the core of who we are. That, to me, is great in theory. Like it's I think it's absolutely right. But then to see it, how it's manifesting itself in this context is really great, and how it illuminates and brings the dynamics of procrastination in a certain way, and also bringing home. I just really appreciate it. So I just want to thank you for your work on this, Nic.
Thanks, Matt. I've learned so much from you, from bringing a self-relational and existential and Kierkegaardian perspective. It's added a real richness and depth that I didn't even know was impossible.
So it sounds like we should work together. Maybe start Vogue Academy.
Yeah, maybe I'll call it the Mutual Admiration Society. Yeah.
There we go. Well, anyway, Nic, thanks so much for another great talk, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you, Matt.